The train lurched to a stop in Yosemite, California, and Genevieve Norton knew that if her father's men found her now, they would drag her back to Boston in chains if they had to. She stepped onto the wooden platform with nothing but a carpetbag, a forged letter of correspondence, and a name that was not her own. The September heat of 1878 pressed against her corset like a physical weight, and she resisted the urge to loosen the laces right there in public. 3 weeks ago, she had been Miss Genevieve Norton of the Boston Nortons, expected to marry Senator Whitmore's son in a ceremony that would unite two of the most powerful families in Massachusetts. Now she was supposedly Grace Nelson, a seamstress from Missouri responding to a rancher's advertisement for a mail-order bride. The guilt of stealing another woman's identity gnawed at her. But Grace Nelson had died of consumption 2 days before she was meant to board the westbound train. Genevieve had been volunteering at the charity hospital when she overheard the nurses discussing the poor woman's passing, and in a moment of desperate clarity, she had seen her escape route. She told herself Grace would have understood, would have wanted someone to live the free life she never got to experience. The platform was mostly empty except for a few miners loading equipment onto a wagon, and an older woman sweeping the steps of what appeared to be a general store. Genevieve scanned the faces, looking for anyone who might be Preston Lawson, the rancher who had placed the advertisement. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her carpetbag. "Miss Nelson." The voice came from behind her, deep and cautious. She turned to find a man in his mid-20s, tall and lean with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of creek water in summer. He held his hat in his hands, his dark hair slightly mussed from where the brim had pressed it down. He was nothing like the perfumed dandies who had courted her in Boston drawing rooms, and something in her chest tightened at the sight of him. "Yes," she said, then cleared her throat. "Yes, that is me. Are you Mr. Lawson?" "Preston Lawson, yes, madam." He shifted his weight, looking as uncomfortable as she felt. "I hope your journey was not too difficult." It was long but manageable. She was surprised at how steady her voice sounded when her entire world was balanced on this knife's edge of deception. "Thank you for meeting me." An awkward silence stretched between them. Preston gestured toward a wagon hitched nearby, pulled by 2 sturdy horses. "My ranch is about an hour's ride from town. I thought we might stop at the general store first if you need anything. Supplies, or whatever you might be needing." "That would be kind, thank you." Genevieve followed him toward the wagon, acutely aware that she was walking toward a life with a complete stranger. But it was a stranger of her choosing, not one foisted upon her by family obligation and social climbing. Preston loaded her carpetbag into the wagon bed with a gentleness that surprised her. Most men of her acquaintance would have had a servant do such work. When he offered his hand to help her up onto the seat, his palm was calloused and warm, and she found herself reluctant to let go. They rode through the small town in silence. Yosemite was nothing like Boston. The buildings were mostly wood, practical and dusty, with none of the grand stone facades she had grown up surrounded by. But there was something honest about it, something real. People nodded to Preston as they passed, and a few curious glances were thrown her way, but no one stared with the calculating assessment she was used to from Boston society matrons. Preston pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the general store. "I have an account here," he said. "Whatever you need, just tell old Henry and he'll add it to my tab." "I could not possibly. You are going to be my wife," he said quietly, and there was something uncertain in his voice, as if he was testing how the words sounded. "What is mine will be yours. That is how I see marriage working." Genevieve felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the California sun. In Boston, marriage contracts were drawn up specifying exactly what remained whose property, what would transfer, What would be held in trust? The simplicity of Preston's statement was both foreign and deeply appealing. Inside the store, she selected only what seemed necessary. Fabric for new dresses more suitable to ranch life, practical boots, a few cooking supplies. The real Grace Nelson had been a seamstress, and Genevieve knew enough needlework from her expensive education to hopefully maintain the ruse. What she did not know was how to cook, clean, or do any of the practical work that would be expected of a rancher's wife. That particular terror was something she was trying not to think about too directly. "You are not getting much," Preston observed, appearing at her elbow with a sack of flour under one arm. "I do not wish to be presumptuous with your money." He gave her an odd look. "Most women in your position would be excited to finally have access to more than the basics. Your letters said you had been living pretty roughly since your folks passed." Genevieve's heart stuttered. She had not thought to read Grace's letters thoroughly, had only skimmed them for basic information. What else had the real Grace told him about her fictional life? "I suppose I learned to make do with less," she said carefully. "It becomes a habit." Preston nodded slowly, but she thought she saw a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He did not press the issue, though, and for that she was grateful. They loaded the supplies into the wagon and began the journey to his ranch. The road wound through hills dotted with oak trees, and in the distance, Genevieve could see the granite peaks of the Sierra Nevada. The landscape was wild and vast in a way that made her heart ache with something she could not quite name. In Boston, every inch of earth was owned, controlled, and manicured. Here, the land seemed to stretch on forever, indifferent to human ambition. "It is beautiful," she said softly. "I have always thought so." Preston kept his eyes on the road, but she heard warmth in his voice. "Came out here 5 years ago with nothing but a horse and a dream. Built the ranch up from scratch. It is not fancy, but it is mine. Well, ours now, I suppose. Tell me about it. The ranch, I mean." He glanced at her, and for the first time she saw him smile. It transformed his face, softening the hard edges that wind and sun had carved there. "Got about 200 acres, most of it grazing land for cattle. I run about 50 head right now, hoping to expand next year. There is a small house, 2 bedrooms, kitchen, and a main room. I built a separate bunkhouse for my 2 ranch hands, Coulter and James. They are good men, been with me for 3 years now." "It sounds wonderful," Genevieve said, and meant it. 200 acres. In Boston, her father's townhouse had sat on a plot barely 1/8 of an acre, crowded on all sides by other wealthy families in their equally cramped mansions. "I should tell you," Preston said, his voice growing more serious. "Life out here is not easy. The work is hard and the hours are long. I know you said in your letters that you were not afraid of hard work, but I want you to understand what you are signing up for. I will do my best to provide for you, but there will not be luxuries. No fancy dresses or dinner parties." If he only knew how appealing that sounded. "I understand," Genevieve said. "I am not afraid of hard work." That was not entirely a lie. She was not afraid of it so much as desperately inexperienced with it. The ranch came into view as they crested a hill, and Genevieve felt her breath catch. The house was small, as Preston had said, but it was painted white and had a covered porch with a rocking chair. Behind it stood a barn and several outbuildings, all well maintained. Cattle grazed in fenced pastures, and beyond them the land rolled away toward the mountains. It was not grand, but it was peaceful in a way she had never experienced. 2 men emerged from the barn as Preston pulled the wagon to a stop. One was older, probably in his 40s, with a graying beard and a weathered face. The other was younger, maybe 20, with red hair and a ready smile. "Boys, this is Miss Nelson. Grace, these are my ranch hands, Coulter and James." "Pleased to meet you, madam," Coulter said, touching his hat brim. James just grinned and nodded. "The pleasure is mine," Genevieve said, trying to sound like someone who belonged in this world. "We will let you folks get settled," Coulter said diplomatically, elbowing James when the younger man looked inclined to linger and stare. "Come on, boy. Those fences are not going to mend themselves." Preston carried her carpet bag toward the house, and Genevieve followed, her heart pounding. This was it. The moment she crossed that threshold, she was committed to this deception. There would be no going back. The interior of the house was sparse but clean. The main room contained a fireplace, a table with 4 chairs, and a worn sofa. The kitchen area occupied one corner with a wood stove and open shelving. Everything was neat, almost painfully so, as if Preston had spent considerable time preparing for her arrival. "The bedroom is through here," Preston said, leading her to a doorway. "I moved my things to the other room. Thought you might want some privacy until we know each other better." Genevieve felt a rush of relief so intense she almost swayed. She had been dreading this aspect of her impulsive plan. "That is very considerate of you." "My mother raised me to be a gentleman," Preston said simply. "I know this situation is not exactly conventional, you coming all this way to marry a stranger. I do not expect you to immediately be comfortable with all the aspects of marriage. We can take things slow." She wanted to kiss him for that, which was alarming given that she had known him for less than 2 hours. "Thank you, Preston, truly." He ducked his head, looking embarrassed. "I will let you settle in. There is water in the pitcher if you want to wash up. Supper is usually around 7. I am not much of a cook, but I can manage beans and bacon well enough." After he left, Genevieve sank onto the simple bed and let herself shake. She had done it. She had actually escaped. But as the adrenaline began to fade, the reality of her situation settled over her like a heavy blanket. She did not know how to be a rancher's wife. She did not know how to cook or clean or do any of the 1,000 tasks that would be expected of her. Grace Nelson had been a working woman, skilled and capable. Genevieve was a pampered society girl, whose greatest accomplishment was playing the piano tolerably well and speaking passable French. She would have to learn, and quickly, before Preston realized he had been deceived. The next morning, Genevieve woke to the sound of roosters and found Preston already gone from the house. A note on the table informed her that he was out checking fence lines and would be back by noon. There was bread and butter laid out for breakfast, along with coffee already made on the stove. She ate quickly, then surveyed the kitchen with growing panic. She should clean something, cook something, do something to earn her keep. But what? She knew the theory of cooking, had watched kitchen maids prepare meals in her father's house, but had never actually done it herself. She decided to start with something simple. Bread. How hard could bread be? 3 hours later, the kitchen was dusted with flour, her hair had escaped its pins, and the lump of dough on the table looked more like a weapon than food. She was near tears when Preston walked in. He stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene. Genevieve waited for anger, for accusations, for him to demand to know what kind of seamstress could not even bake bread. Instead, he started laughing. Not cruel laughter, but genuine amusement that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "What are you trying to make?" "Bread," she said miserably. "I thought I could manage bread." "Have you ever made bread before?" She should lie. But something about the kindness in his face made her want to tell the truth, or at least part of it. "No," she admitted. "I am not very experienced with cooking. Your letters said you had been working as a seamstress in St. Louis. I figured you would have learned some cooking." "I boarded with a family," Genevieve said, improvising frantically. "They provided meals. I never really had to cook for myself." Preston considered this, then shrugged. "Well, I suppose we will learn together. I am not much better in the kitchen myself. Come on, let me show you what my mother taught me." For the next hour, Preston patiently walked her through the process of making proper bread dough. His hands were patient as he showed her how to knead, how to tell when the consistency was right. He stood close enough that she could smell the soap he used, cedar and something else she could not identify. When flour ended up on her nose, he brushed it off with his thumb, and the gesture was so tender she felt tears prick her eyes. "There," he said as they set the dough to rise. "That was not so bad, was it? You are a good teacher," she said softly. "Thank you for not being angry." "Angry?" He looked genuinely puzzled. "Why would I be angry? Everyone has to learn sometime. My first attempt at bread turned out like a rock. James still jokes about it." This simple acceptance was so foreign to Genevieve's experience that she did not know how to process it. In her world, inadequacy was shameful, something to be hidden or corrected in private. The idea that she could fail at something and be met with patience and humor was revolutionary. Over the following days, a rhythm began to establish itself. Preston would wake early and do the ranch work that required his attention, but he always made time to teach Genevieve something new: how to cook beans properly, how to work the wood stove without burning everything, how to manage the small vegetable garden behind the house. He never questioned her lack of knowledge, seemed to accept her story about boarding with a family and having limited domestic experience. Genevieve, for her part, threw herself into learning with the same intensity she had once applied to mastering the piano or memorizing French verbs. She was determined to become the wife Preston deserved, to earn her place in this new life. And slowly, almost without realizing it, she was becoming someone new. Her hands, once soft and carefully manicured, developed calluses. Her skin, despite her best efforts with bonnets, took on color from the sun. Her body, freed from the rigid constraints of tight lacing and heavy skirts, grew stronger. But it was not just the physical changes. Something inside her was shifting too. The constant anxiety that had plagued her in Boston, the sense of being trapped in a life that was slowly suffocating her, began to fade. Here, she could breathe. Here, she could be herself, or at least begin to discover who herself actually was beneath all the layers of social expectation. Preston was a large part of that feeling. He treated her with a respect she had never experienced from the men in her social circle. He asked her opinion on ranch matters, listened when she spoke, and never once dismissed her thoughts as frivolous or unimportant. When she successfully baked her first edible loaf of bread, he praised her with such genuine pride that she felt like she had accomplished something truly significant, and she was falling in love with him. It crept up on her slowly, in small moments. The way he always made sure there was hot coffee waiting for her in the morning, the patience he showed when teaching her something new, the quiet pride in his voice when he talked about the ranch and his plans for the future. The way he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she was not watching, with a mixture of wonder and something that might have been tenderness. 3 weeks after her arrival, they were married by the circuit preacher who came through Yosemite once a month. It was a simple ceremony in the small church, with Coulter and James as witnesses, and a handful of townspeople who had become friendly with Preston over the years. Genevieve wore a new dress she had sewn herself, pale blue calico, that was nothing like the elaborate silk confection her mother had commissioned for her planned Boston wedding. And she had never felt more beautiful. Preston slipped a simple gold band on her finger and promised to honor and cherish her. When the preacher pronounced them married, Preston kissed her gently, chastely, in front of the small congregation. But there was something in that kiss, a promise of more, that made her heart race. They held a small celebration at the ranch afterward. Coulter produced a fiddle from somewhere and played lively tunes while James danced with the few single women who had attended. Someone brought whiskey, and someone else brought a cake that was lopsided but delicious. Preston danced with Genevieve in the fading light, and she found that here, in his arms with the mountains purple against the darkening sky, she had never felt more at home. That night, Preston came to her room. He knocked softly, waited for her permission to enter. She was sitting on the bed in her nightgown, nervous but not afraid. "I do not want to pressure you," he said, standing in the doorway. "But we are married now, and if you are willing, I would like to be a proper husband to you." Genevieve's heart was pounding, but not with fear, with anticipation. With want. "I am willing," she said softly. He closed the door and came to her, his movements slow and careful. When he kissed her this time, it was not the chaste press of lips from the ceremony. It was deep and searching, and Genevieve responded with an enthusiasm that seemed to surprise them both. His hands were gentle as he helped her out of her nightgown, reverent as they explored her body. And when they finally came together, it was with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. Afterward, lying in his arms, Genevieve felt the last piece of her old life fall away. She was no longer Miss Genevieve Norton of Boston. She was Grace Lawson, rancher's wife, and she had never been happier. But happiness, she was learning, was often accompanied by fear of losing it. The first letter arrived 6 weeks after the wedding. Preston brought it back from town, his expression curious as he handed it to her. "Letter for you," he said, "postmarked from Boston." Genevieve's blood turned to ice. She forced herself to keep her expression neutral as she took the envelope. "Boston? I do not know anyone in Boston." "Maybe it is from that family you boarded with," Preston suggested. "The return address just says G. Norton. Her father had found her." "Maybe," she managed to say. "I will read it later." She waited until Preston was out working with the cattle before she opened it with shaking hands. The handwriting was her father's, bold and angry even on paper. "Genevieve, I know where you are. This charade ends now. You will return to Boston immediately, or I will come to California and drag you back myself. You have embarrassed this family and destroyed an alliance that took years to arrange. Senator Whitmore is willing to overlook your temporary insanity if you return and marry his son as planned. Do not test my patience further. Your father, Gregory Norton." She burned the letter in the kitchen stove, watching the paper curl and blacken, but burning the evidence did not erase the threat. Her father knew where she was. It was only a matter of time before he acted on that knowledge. The fear she thought she had escaped came roaring back. She went through the next few days in a haze of anxiety, jumping at every sound, expecting to see her father or his hired men riding up the path at any moment. Preston noticed her distraction, asked if something was wrong, but she could not tell him. How could she explain that she had been lying to him from the beginning? That she was not who she claimed to be? The second letter arrived a week later. This one was shorter. "Since you have ignored my first correspondence, I am left with no choice. I will arrive in Yosemite on October 15th. Be prepared to return with me. Your father." October 15th was 4 days away. Genevieve felt her carefully constructed world crumbling. She could not let her father take her back to Boston. She would not. But how could she fight him? He had money, power, connections. She had nothing but a husband who thought her name was Grace and a life built on lies. That night, lying next to Preston in the darkness, she made a decision. She had to tell him the truth. He deserved to know who she really was, and she deserved to face the consequences of her deception. If he threw her out, if he hated her, at least she would have been honest with him. "Preston," she whispered, "are you awake?" "Yeah." His voice was rough with sleep. "What is wrong? You have been tense for days." "I need to tell you something important." He rolled to face her, and even in the darkness she could feel the weight of his attention. "All right." She took a deep breath. "My name is not Grace Nelson. Grace Nelson died before she could come to California. I stole her identity because I needed to escape." Silence. Heavy and terrible. "Who are you?" Preston's voice was carefully neutral. "My name is Genevieve Norton. I am from Boston. My father is Gregory Norton, one of the wealthiest men in Massachusetts. He arranged for me to marry a senator's son, and I ran away rather than go through with it." More silence. Genevieve pressed on, the words tumbling out now that she had started. "I am sorry I lied to you. I was desperate, and I saw an opportunity, and I took it without thinking about how it would affect you. I know you have every right to be angry, to hate me, but I need you to know that everything that has happened between us, every feeling I have for you, that is real. I have never been more myself than I have been here with you." Preston sat up, running his hand through his hair. "Your father is Gregory Norton, the railroad magnate. You know of him. Anyone who reads a newspaper knows of him." Preston's voice was strange, tight. "He is one of the most powerful men in the country, and you are his daughter." "I was his property," Genevieve said bitterly. "A pawn to be traded for political connections. I could not do it, Preston. I could not spend my life as some senator's ornament, smiling and nodding and dying inside. So you became my wife instead." There was something in his voice she could not read. A rancher's wife in the middle of nowhere, doing work you were never trained for. "Yes." She reached for his hand in the darkness. "And I have been happier these past 2 months than I ever was in my entire life before. This life with you, it is everything I wanted without knowing I wanted it." Preston pulled his hand away, and Genevieve felt her heart break. "Why are you telling me this now? Why not keep lying?" "Because my father knows where I am. He has been sending letters. He is coming to take me back, Preston. He will be here in 4 days." Preston stood up, pacing the small room. 4 days? And you thought you would just tell me now, after 2 months of lying, "I am sorry"? Tears were streaming down her face now. "I am so sorry. I wanted to tell you sooner, but I was afraid. Afraid you would send me away, afraid I would lose this life, lose you. You should have told me from the beginning." His voice was hard. "I asked you to be my wife, to share my life, and all of it was based on a lie." "Not all of it," Genevieve protested. "The feelings are real. The love is real." "How do I know that? How do I know anything about you is real?" She had no answer for that. Preston stood at the window, his back to her, rigid with anger or hurt or both. "I am going to sleep in the other room," he said finally. "I need time to think." He left, and Genevieve curled up on the bed, sobbing into her pillow. She had known this was a possibility, had known that the truth might destroy what they had built. But knowing it intellectually and experiencing it were two very different things. The next 3 days were the worst of Genevieve's life. Preston was coldly polite, speaking to her only when necessary. He slept in the other room. He ate his meals quickly and left to work on the ranch. She tried to talk to him several times, but he brushed her off, saying he needed time. Coulter and James noticed the tension but wisely stayed out of it. Genevieve threw herself into her work, cleaning the house until it gleamed, tending the garden, mending every piece of clothing she could find. Anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from spiraling. On the morning of October 15th, she woke before dawn and dressed carefully in one of her nicest dresses. If she was going to face her father, she would do it with whatever dignity she could muster. She packed her carpet bag with the few possessions she had brought from Boston, leaving behind all the things she had acquired in California. They belonged to Grace Lawson, and Grace Lawson had ceased to exist. Preston was already up, drinking coffee at the kitchen table. He looked like he had not slept. "You are leaving," he said. "It was not a question." My father will be here soon. I will not force you to face him to deal with the consequences of my actions." "Where will you go?" she shrugged, trying to seem braver than she felt. "I do not know. Somewhere. I will not go back to Boston, I know that much." Preston was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What if you stayed?" Genevieve's heart leapt. "What? What if you stayed here and we faced your father together?" "Preston, you do not understand. My father is not a man who accepts defeat. He will make your life miserable. He has the power to destroy you, to take your ranch, to let him try." Preston stood up, and for the first time in 3 days, he looked at her with something other than cold distance. "I have been doing a lot of thinking the past few days. About who you are, what you did, why you did it, and I keep coming back to the same conclusion." "What conclusion?" "That I love you." The words hung in the air between them. "Not Grace Nelson from Missouri. You. Genevieve Norton from Boston, who ran away from a life she did not want and tried to build a new one here. The woman who burned 3 loaves of bread before she got it right, who fell off a horse trying to help me herd cattle, who sits on the porch every evening and watches the sunset like it is a miracle. That woman, I love that woman." Genevieve felt tears streaming down her face. "Even though I lied to you, I am not happy about the lying," Preston admitted. "It hurt, finding out you had been deceiving me. But I understand why you did it, and I believe you when you say your feelings are real. I have seen the way you look at this place, at me. That is not something you can fake." "I do love you," Genevieve said fiercely. "More than I thought it was possible to love someone." "Then we face your father together. This is your home now, and I am your husband. In the eyes of the law and God, you are Grace Lawson, and your father has no claim on you. He will not see it that way. Then we will make him see it that way." The sound of horses approaching interrupted them. Genevieve's stomach dropped. She went to the window and saw 3 men riding up the path, led by a figure she recognized immediately. Gregory Norton, still imposing at 62, his silver hair gleaming in the morning sun. Flanking him were 2 younger men, probably hired men or lawyers. Preston came to stand beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "Ready? No, but let us do this anyway." They walked out onto the porch together. Preston's hand found hers, squeezed gently. Genevieve squeezed back, drawing strength from him. Gregory Norton dismounted, his cold blue eyes sweeping over the ranch with obvious disdain before settling on Genevieve. "So this is where you have been hiding. I expected better from you, Genevieve. This is beneath even your recent standards of behavior. Father." Genevieve was pleased to hear her voice come out steady. "I am not hiding, I am living my life." "Your life?" Gregory laughed, a harsh sound. "This is not a life. This is a fantasy, a childish rebellion. It ends now. Get your things. We leave for Boston within the hour." "No." The single word seemed to shock him. Gregory was not accustomed to being refused. "Excuse me," I said no. "I am not going back to Boston. I am married now, Father. This is my home." Gregory's gaze shifted to Preston, and the contempt in his eyes was palpable. "Married to this dusty cowboy." "Genevieve, do not be absurd. This is not a real marriage. You lied to get here, used a false identity. That invalidates any legal contract." "The marriage license has my real name on it," Genevieve said. "I told Preston the truth before we were married." This was a lie, but her father did not need to know that. "The marriage is completely legal." This was actually something she and Preston had discussed in frantic whispers before her father arrived. They had gone to the town clerk the previous day and filed an amendment to the marriage record, correcting her name. The clerk, who was a friend of Preston's, had been willing to backdate the correction. Gregory's expression darkened. "Then I will have it annulled. I have lawyers who can argue coercion, fraud, any number of grounds." "Try it," Preston said, speaking for the first time. His voice was calm but hard as iron. I am sure a judge will be very interested to hear how a wealthy man from Boston is trying to force his adult daughter to leave her legal husband and return to marry someone else, especially a senator's son. The newspapers would love that story. Gregory's eyes narrowed. Are you threatening me, boy? I am stating facts. Preston did not flinch under that cold gaze. Genevieve is my wife. She is staying here. If you try to force her to leave, I will fight you with every legal means available, and I will make sure every newspaper from here to Boston knows the story. You have no idea who you are dealing with, Gregory said softly. I can destroy you. I can buy your land out from under you, ruin your reputation, ensure you never sell a head of cattle again. You can try, Preston agreed, but California is not Boston. Your money and influence do not carry as much weight out here, and I am not afraid of you. Genevieve had never loved him more than in that moment, watching him stand up to the man who had terrified her for most of her life. Gregory turned back to Genevieve. Is this really what you want? To throw away everything you are, everything you were raised to be for this? He gestured at the ranch with undisguised scorn. Yes, Genevieve said firmly. This is exactly what I want. I am sorry that I could not be the daughter you wanted, the pawn you could trade for political advantage. But I am not sorry I left, and I am not sorry I built a life here. For the first time in my life I am happy. I am free, and I will not give that up. Something flickered in Gregory's eyes. For just a moment, Genevieve thought she saw hurt there, buried beneath the anger. But it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. You are making a mistake, he said finally. You think this freedom you have found will last. Life is hard out here. You were raised for better things, Genevieve. You do not belong in this world. Maybe I did not belong in that world, she said softly. Maybe that is why I never fit, why I always felt like I was suffocating. You wanted me to be something I am not, Father. And I am sorry for that, truly. But I cannot live my life for you anymore. Gregory stared at her for a long moment. Then he shook his head. Fine. Stay here, play at being a rancher's wife. But when this fantasy falls apart, when you realize what you have given up, do not come crying to me. You have made your choice and you will have to live with it. He mounted his horse and his companions followed suit. Before he rode away, he looked at Preston. If you hurt her, if you fail to provide for her, I will come back, and next time there will be no discussion. I will spend every day of my life making sure she never regrets choosing me, Preston said quietly. Gregory said nothing, just turned his horse and rode away. The two other men followed, kicking up dust as they headed back toward town. Genevieve stood frozen until they were out of sight. Then her knees buckled, and if Preston had not caught her, she would have fallen. It is over, he murmured, holding her close. He is gone. He came all this way, Genevieve said wonderingly. My father never does anything himself. He always sends servants or lawyers, but he came himself. Maybe it means he cares more than you thought, or maybe he just hates losing. Preston guided her back into the house and sat her down at the table. He poured her a cup of coffee, added sugar the way she liked it. His hands were shaking slightly, and Genevieve realized that standing up to her father had taken more courage than he had shown. Thank you, she said. For standing with me, for not letting him take me. You are my wife, Preston said simply. Where you go, I go. What threatens you, I fight. That is what marriage means to me. Genevieve reached across the table and took his hand. I am sorry for lying to you. I am sorry for putting you in this position. If you want to end this marriage, if you want me to leave, stop. Preston squeezed her hand. I am not going to lie and say the deception did not hurt. It did. But I understand why you did it, and I forgive you. What we have built together these past months, that is real. And I am not willing to throw it away because of how it started. "I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you," Genevieve promised. "How about you start by telling me your real story?" Preston suggested. "Not the edited version you thought I could accept. The whole truth from the beginning." So she did. She told him about growing up in Boston, the suffocating expectations, the endless lessons in deportment and social graces. She told him about her mother, who had died when Genevieve was 16, and how after that, her father had become increasingly focused on using her for social advancement. She told him about the engagement to Senator Whitmore's son, a man she had met exactly 3 times before the marriage was arranged. A man who looked at her like she was a prize he had won rather than a person. She told him about hearing of Grace Nelson's death, about stealing the woman's letters and identity papers in a moment of desperate clarity, about buying a train ticket and fleeing west, expecting at every moment to be caught and dragged back, about the terror and exhilaration of stepping off the train in Yosemite and seeing him for the first time. Preston listened to it all without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "That took courage," he said finally. "Leaving everything you knew, everyone you knew, to come west alone. I cannot imagine doing something like that." "I am not brave," Genevieve protested. "I was just desperate. Courage and desperation often look the same." Preston smiled slightly. "And for what it is worth, I am glad you did it. I am glad Grace Nelson's letters found their way to me, glad you saw them and decided to take a chance. Otherwise, I would still be alone on this ranch, and you would be married to some senator's son in Boston, and neither of us would know what we were missing." "Do you really mean that?" "Every word." He pulled her to her feet and into his arms. "You are my wife, Genevieve, not Grace Genevieve, and I love you." She kissed him then, pouring all her relief and gratitude and love into it. He responded in kind, his arms tightening around her. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "We should probably talk about some practical matters," Preston said, his voice rough. "Are there other people from your old life who might come looking for you? Other threats we need to prepare for?" Genevieve thought about it. "Possibly the senator's son, if he is angry enough about the broken engagement. But I do not think so. He never seemed particularly invested in me personally. It was the alliance with my father he wanted, not me specifically. And now that my father has essentially disowned me, that alliance is worthless. What about friends? Anyone who might worry about you?" "I had acquaintances, not real friends. The daughters of other wealthy families, women I played piano with and attended parties with. But no one who would truly miss me." She realized how sad that sounded. That was part of the problem, actually. I was surrounded by people all the time, but I was completely alone. Preston pulled her close again. "You are not alone anymore." "No," she agreed, resting her head on his chest. "I am not." The next few weeks passed in a haze of relief and adjustment. Now that Preston knew the truth about her, Genevieve felt like she could finally breathe. She did not have to watch every word, worry about slipping up and revealing her true background. She could just be herself, whoever that was. And she was still discovering who that self was. Without the constant pressure of her father's expectations, without the rigid rules of Boston society, she was free to explore her own interests and abilities. She discovered she enjoyed physical work, the way it made her body feel strong and capable. She loved working in the garden, watching things grow under her care. She loved riding horses, once she got over her initial fear. Preston taught her to rope cattle, to mend fences, to shoot a rifle. "You are a natural," he said one afternoon, watching her hit the target 3 times in a row. "Better than James, and he has been shooting for years." "I just focus on staying calm and steady," Genevieve said. "It is not so different from the mental discipline required for playing piano." "Play piano?" Preston looked surprised. "I did not know you could play." "I had lessons for 12 years. Genevieve laughed at his expression. "There is a lot about my old life you do not know yet. I can also speak French, embroider, and recite most of Shakespeare from memory." "Recite Shakespeare." My governess was very thorough. Genevieve smiled. "Would you like a demonstration, maybe later?" Preston pulled her close, kissing her soundly. "Right now, I can think of better uses for your mouth." She laughed against his lips, delighted by his teasing. This was another revelation of her new life, the physical joy of marriage. In Boston, she had been taught that relations between husband and wife were a duty, something to be endured. No one had told her it could be passionate, playful, deeply connecting. Preston was a generous lover, attentive to her needs and responses. And she was learning to be bold in return, to ask for what she wanted, to explore his body with the same freedom he explored hers. They made love in the hayloft one afternoon, stifling their laughter as they tried to stay quiet so Coulter and James would not hear. They made love under the stars on a warm night, with blankets spread on the grass and the mountains looming dark against the sky. They made love in the early morning when the world was still gray and soft, taking their time because there was no rush, nowhere else to be. Genevieve had never been happier. But she also knew that happiness was fragile, something that had to be protected and nurtured. Winter came to the Sierra Nevada with surprising gentleness. The days grew shorter and cooler, but snow did not fall heavily in Yosemite itself, staying mostly in the higher elevations. Preston and the ranch hands spent long days preparing for the harder weather that would come in January and February, making sure the cattle had adequate shelter, and the barns were stocked with feed. Genevieve threw herself into preparing the house. She made quilts from fabric scraps, canned vegetables from the garden, and learned to make hearty stews that would warm them through the cold nights. She even attempted knitting, though her first scarf came out lumpy and misshapen. "It is perfect," Preston said when she gave it to him, wrapping it around his neck despite its flaws. "It is terrible," Genevieve laughed, "but I will get better." "I am sure you will. You have gotten better at everything else." It was true. The pampered society girl who had arrived in California was gone, replaced by someone stronger, more capable. Genevieve's hands were calloused now, her body lean and muscular from physical work. But more than that, her spirit felt lighter. She woke each morning without the dread that had plagued her in Boston, without the feeling of being trapped in a life she had not chosen. Christmas came, and they celebrated quietly. Preston surprised her with a gift, a beautiful leather-bound journal. "I thought you might want to write down your thoughts," he explained, "or maybe write about your new life, whatever you want." Genevieve felt tears prick her eyes. It was such a thoughtful gift, showing how well he understood her need to process and document her experiences. "Thank you, I love it." She gave him a new hat that she had carefully selected from the general store, along with a shirt she had sewn herself. The stitching was not perfect, but it was competent, and Preston wore it proudly. They spent Christmas Day at the ranch, just the two of them. Preston roasted a chicken, and Genevieve made potatoes and bread. They sat by the fire afterward, trading stories about past Christmases. Preston's memories were simple but warm, filled with family and modest traditions. Genevieve's were more elaborate but less joyful, describing elaborate parties and expensive gifts that had felt hollow. "Next year, maybe we will have more to celebrate," Preston said, his hand resting on her stomach. Genevieve understood what he was implying. They had been married for 3 months now, and it was possible she could be pregnant, though she had no signs yet. The idea filled her with both excitement and terror. She wanted Preston's children, wanted to build a family with him. But she also worried about her ability to be a good mother, given how little nurturing she had received from her own parents. "Would you want children?" she asked. "Eventually, yes. But there is no rush. We have time to just be us for a while." She loved him for understanding her unspoken anxiety. "I think I would like that. Children, eventually, a family. Then that is what we will have." He pulled her close and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn low. January brought harder weather. Snow fell in earnest and the temperature dropped. The work of the ranch became more difficult, requiring longer hours outside in bitter cold. Preston and the ranch hands struggled to keep the cattle fed and safe, breaking ice off water troughs and hauling feed through snowdrifts. Genevieve did what she could to help, bringing hot coffee and food out to the men, making sure there was always a warm fire and dry clothes waiting when they came in. She worried about Preston, seeing the exhaustion in his face, the way his hands cracked and bled from the cold despite the gloves he wore. "You are working too hard," she told him one night, rubbing salve into his damaged hands. "It is what has to be done," he said simply. "If I do not take care of the cattle now, we will lose them. And if we lose them, we lose everything." The stark reality of their situation hit Genevieve then. This was not a game or an adventure. Their survival depended on the success of this ranch, on Preston's ability to keep the cattle alive and healthy through the winter. If something happened to the herd, if disease or cold or predators decimated it, they would have nothing. "How much money do we have?" she asked. Preston looked uncomfortable. "Not much. Most of our capital is tied up in the herd. I have maybe $300 in the bank, and that is our emergency fund." $300. In Boston, her father spent more than that on a single dinner party. And here, it was all that stood between them and destitution. "I have some jewelry," Genevieve said. "Pieces I brought with me from Boston. We could sell them if we need to." "I am not going to sell your jewelry. It is just sitting in a drawer, Preston. If selling it could help secure our future, why would we not do that?" He shook his head stubbornly. "I can provide for my wife without selling her jewelry. We will be fine." Genevieve did not argue, but she made a mental note of where the nearest jeweler was. If things got desperate, she would sell the jewelry whether Preston approved or not. It was the least she could do after everything he had given her. The crisis came in February, sudden and devastating. A late winter storm blew in, bringing heavy snow and dangerous cold. The cattle, already weakened by months of hard winter, began to die. Preston and the ranch hands worked around the clock, trying to move the surviving animals to better shelter, trying to provide enough food and warmth. But it was not enough. When the storm finally broke, they had lost 20 head. Nearly half the herd. Preston stood in the snow-covered pasture, surveying the dead cattle with a blank expression that scared Genevieve more than tears would have. "Preston," she said softly, touching his arm. "That is it," he said, his voice hollow. "That is the ranch. Without those cattle, we cannot make the loan payment. The bank will foreclose. Everything I have built, everything I have worked for, it is gone." "No." Genevieve grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. "No, it is not gone. We still have 30 cattle. We still have this land. We still have each other. We will figure this out." "How?" For the first time since she had known him, Preston sounded defeated. "I do not have enough money to replace the lost cattle or pay the loan. The bank will not extend more credit. It is over, Genevieve. Let me help." She had already made the decision. "I have jewelry worth at least $5,000. We can sell it, use the money to buy new cattle and pay down the loan." Preston shook his head. "I cannot take your jewelry. It is not yours to take, it is mine to give." She kept her voice firm. "Preston, I left Boston with those jewels because they were portable wealth, the only thing I could carry that had real value. I always knew I might need to sell them someday. That day is here. Let me contribute to our life together. Let me help save our ranch." "This is not your responsibility," he said, but she could hear the hope creeping into his voice. "Of course it is. I am your wife. Your problems are my problems, your struggles are my struggles. We are partners, Preston, and partners help each other." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I do not deserve you." "Yes, you do." She pulled back to look at him. "You gave me freedom when I had none. You gave me love when I thought I was not capable of it. You stood up to my father and fought for me to stay. Let me do this for you. For us." The next day, Genevieve rode into Yosemite with Preston, the jewelry carefully wrapped in cloth. The jeweler, a shrewd man named Marcus Chen who had come to California during the gold rush, examined each piece with a critical eye. "These are quality items," he said, picking up an emerald necklace that had belonged to Genevieve's grandmother. "Boston manufacture, probably Tiffany. I can give you $4,500 for the lot." "They are worth at least $6,000, Genevieve countered. She might not know much about ranching, but she understood the value of fine jewelry. Marcus smiled. "Perhaps in Boston. Here, I have to factor in the difficulty of reselling such high-end pieces. $4,500 is a fair price." They settled on $5,000 after some negotiation. Genevieve felt a pang as she watched the jeweler take the pieces away, especially her grandmother's necklace. That necklace had been one of the few bright spots of her childhood, a connection to a woman who had been kind to her. But sentimentality was a luxury they could not afford. With the money in hand, Preston immediately went to the bank and made a substantial payment on the loan. Then they visited several nearby ranches, looking for cattle to purchase. By the end of the week, they had bought 15 head, young and healthy animals that would help rebuild the herd. "It is not as many as we lost," Preston said as they watched the new cattle settle into the pasture. "But it is a start. With luck and hard work, we can build back up over the next few years." "We will make it work," Genevieve said confidently, and she believed it. They had faced her father, survived a brutal winter, and come out the other side still standing. What else could possibly challenge them? Spring arrived like a promise. The snow melted, revealing green grass beneath. The cattle, including the new ones, began to thrive. Preston's spirits lifted as he saw the ranch recovering from the winter's devastation. He worked from dawn to dusk, but now there was hope in his efforts rather than desperation. Genevieve threw herself into planting a larger garden, determined to grow enough vegetables to preserve for the next winter. She also started raising chickens, which provided eggs and eventually meat. Every little bit helped, every way she could contribute to their self-sufficiency. She also began to make friends in Yosemite. The wife of the general store owner, a woman named Martha, took Genevieve under her wing, teaching her the finer points of canning and preserving. Martha was in her 40s, warm and motherly, and seemed to sense that Genevieve had not had much maternal guidance in her life. "You are doing well, dear," Martha told her one afternoon as they worked together in Martha's kitchen, putting up strawberry preserves. "Preston is lucky to have you." "I am the lucky one," Genevieve said honestly. "He gave me a chance when he did not have to. He accepted me despite my lies." "That is what love is," Martha said wisely. "Accepting someone fully, flaws and all, and from what I can see, you two have found something special." Genevieve thought about that as she rode back to the ranch, the jars of preserves carefully packed in her saddlebag. She had come west looking for freedom, but what she had found was so much more. She had found purpose, partnership, love. She had found herself. That night, lying in bed next to Preston, she said, "I am pregnant." Preston went very still. "What? I am pregnant. I have been feeling ill in the mornings for the past 2 weeks, and I am late. I think I am about 2 months along." He rolled over to face her, his expression stunned. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. I was going to wait a bit longer to tell you to be certain, but I could not keep it to myself anymore." "A baby." Preston's hand moved to her stomach, resting there gently. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Genevieve asked nervously. "I know the timing is not ideal with the ranch still recovering from winter." "Happy," Preston laughed, and there were tears in his eyes. "Genevieve, I am thrilled, terrified but thrilled. We are going to be parents." She felt tears on her own cheeks now. "We are going to be parents." They held each other in the darkness, talking in whispers about the future. Names they liked, whether it would be a boy or girl, how they would need to expand the house to make room. It was surreal and wonderful, this glimpse of what was to come. "You are going to be an amazing mother," Preston said. "I hope so. I did not exactly have a good example." "You will be better than your parents because you are choosing to be. You already love this baby, I can tell. That is more than enough." Genevieve hoped he was right. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Genevieve was lucky. After the first 2 months of morning sickness passed, she felt better than ever. Strong and energetic, she continued to work around the ranch, though Preston fussed at her constantly about not overdoing it. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she told him after he insisted she sit down while he carried water from the well. "I know, but I worry." "Stop worrying and let me help. I feel fine, truly." But she appreciated his concern even when it was overbearing. It showed how much he cared, how invested he was in both her and their unborn child. Summer was hot and dry, and they had to be careful with water. Preston and the hands dug a new irrigation channel from the creek to better water the pastures. It was backbreaking work, but it paid off when the grass stayed green even through the hottest part of July and August. The cattle thrived, growing fat on the good grazing. Preston began making plans to buy more head in the fall to continue rebuilding the herd. Genevieve kept meticulous records of their finances, tracking every expense and income. She discovered she had a head for numbers, something she had never known about herself. In Boston, women of her class were not expected to understand business or finance. Here, it was essential. "We should diversify," she told Preston one evening, showing him her calculations. "Right now, all our income depends on cattle. If we have another bad winter, we could be devastated again. But if we also raised horses or maybe sheep, we would have other income streams." Preston studied her figures. "You are right. I have been thinking about horses myself. There is always demand for good working horses, and the profit margin is better than cattle." "Then let us do it. We could start small, maybe buy a few good mares and a stallion, build up from there." They spent the next few weeks researching and planning. Preston visited other ranches, talked to experienced horse breeders, learned what he could. Genevieve read every book on horse breeding she could find, making notes and asking questions. By September, they had purchased 3 mares and a young stallion, all from good bloodlines. The horses were beautiful, spirited animals that required different care than cattle. Preston was in his element, working with the horses, training them. Genevieve loved watching him, seeing the gentle patience he showed the animals. "You are good at this," she told him. "I always wanted to work with horses, even before I got into cattle. This feels like coming home." Their dreams were taking shape, and Genevieve felt a deep satisfaction in that. They were building something together, creating a life that reflected both their strengths and desires. In October, Martha threw Genevieve a baby shower, inviting all the women from Yosemite and the surrounding ranches. Genevieve was overwhelmed by the generosity of her neighbors, women she had only known for a few months but who treated her like family. They brought blankets they had knitted, tiny gowns they had sewn, advice and encouragement. "You have a good community here," Martha told her as they watched the other women chat and laugh. "These women will be here for you when the baby comes, ready to help however they can." "I never had anything like this in Boston," Genevieve admitted. Everyone was so concerned with propriety and social standing. This feels real in a way those relationships never did. "That is the West for you," Martha said. "Out here, what matters is not where you came from or who your family was. What matters is how you treat people, whether you pull your weight if you are there when someone needs help. You have proven yourself, dear. You are one of us now." Genevieve felt tears sting her eyes. To be accepted, to belong, that was a gift more precious than any she had received in her old life. The baby came in late November, earlier than expected. Genevieve woke in the middle of the night with stabbing pains, and Preston immediately rode to fetch Martha, who had agreed to help with the birth. Martha arrived with the doctor, a gruff older man named Harrison who had delivered half the babies in Yosemite. The labor was long and difficult. Genevieve had thought she understood pain, but this was unlike anything she had experienced. She gripped Preston's hand so hard she worried about breaking bones, and he let her, murmuring encouragement even though she could tell he was terrified. "You are doing great," Martha said, wiping Genevieve's forehead with a cool cloth. "Not much longer now. I cannot," Genevieve gasped. "I cannot do this." "Yes, you can," Preston said firmly. "You are the strongest person I know. You ran away from Boston with nothing. You built a life here from scratch. You saved the ranch. You can do this." His faith in her gave her strength. She bore down when the doctor told her to, pushed when Martha encouraged her, and finally, she heard a baby's cry. "It is a boy," Dr. Harrison announced, holding up a squirming, red-faced infant. "A healthy boy." Genevieve burst into tears as the doctor placed the baby on her chest. He was tiny and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that she knew would eventually be the same creek water color as Preston's. She touched his impossibly small fingers, his soft cheek, and felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." Preston was crying too, unashamedly, as he looked at his son. "He is perfect. You are perfect. Thank you, Genevieve. Thank you for this gift." They named him Peter, after Preston's father, with the middle name Gregory as a tentative olive branch to Genevieve's estranged father. It felt important to acknowledge where she came from, even if she had rejected that life. The first few weeks with Peter were exhausting and overwhelming. He needed to eat constantly, woke every few hours during the night, and cried for reasons Genevieve could not always decipher. She felt like she was fumbling through motherhood, making mistakes at every turn. But Preston was there, sharing the burden. He walked the floor with Peter in the middle of the night, changed diapers without complaint, and looked at their son with such obvious adoration that it made Genevieve's heart ache. And slowly, she began to find her footing. She learned to read Peter's cries, to anticipate his needs. She learned to trust her instincts. Martha visited often, bringing food and advice. The other women from town stopped by, offering help and reassurance. Genevieve realized that she was not alone in this, that she had a whole community supporting her. Christmas that year was magical. Peter was 5 weeks old, starting to be more alert and interactive. Preston carved a small wooden horse for him, even though Peter was far too young to play with it. Genevieve made a small quilt with Peter's name embroidered on it. They spent the day as a family, just the three of them, and Genevieve felt so full of joy she thought she might burst. "This is what I always wanted," she told Preston as they sat by the fire, Peter sleeping in her arms. "I did not know it when I was in Boston, did not have the words for it. But this, A family of my own, a partner who truly sees me, a life built on love rather than obligation. This is what I was running toward. I am glad you found it, Preston said, kissing her forehead. Glad you found me. Always, she promised. I will always be glad. The years that followed were not easy, but they were good. The ranch prospered under their joint management. The horse breeding program that Genevieve had suggested became highly profitable, with buyers coming from all over California to purchase their animals. They were able to pay off the bank loan completely, expand their land holdings, and build a larger house with room for their growing family. Peter was joined by a sister, Anne, 2 years later, and then another son, Thomas, 2 years after that. The house was full of noise and laughter, muddy boots and toys scattered everywhere. Genevieve had never been happier. She stayed in touch with Martha and the other women in Yosemite, maintained her friendships and community connections. She taught Anne and Peter to read using the books she had brought from Boston, determined that her children would have education along with practical skills. Preston taught all the children to ride, to work with animals, to understand the land. They were a team, she and Preston, partners in every sense. They made decisions together, supported each other through difficulties, celebrated successes as shared victories. The love between them deepened with time, growing richer and more complex as they built a life together. Genevieve never heard from her father again after that confrontation in front of the ranch. For years, she wondered if he thought about her, if he regretted how things had ended. Then one day, when Peter was 7 and Anne was 5, a letter arrived from a Boston law firm. Gregory Norton had died, the letter informed her. Heart failure, sudden and unexpected. As his only child, she was entitled to a portion of his estate. The lawyers needed her to travel to Boston to settle the affairs. Genevieve held the letter with shaking hands. Her father was dead. She felt a complicated rush of emotions. Grief for the relationship they had never had, relief that he was no longer a potential threat to her life, guilt for feeling relieved. I should go, she told Preston. I need to close this chapter properly. We will go together, he said. The children can stay with Martha. This is something you should not face alone. So they traveled to Boston, Genevieve's first time back in nearly a decade. The city seemed smaller than she remembered, more cramped and gray. The Norton mansion, which had loomed so large in her childhood memories, just looked like a building now. The estate proceedings were complicated. Her father had left her a substantial inheritance, but with conditions attached through the will. She could only access the full amount if she returned to Boston permanently. Otherwise, she would receive a smaller sum. Take the smaller sum, Preston advised. We do not need his money, not at the cost of our life in California. Are you sure? It is a lot of money we would be walking away from. I am sure. He took her hand. We have everything we need, our ranch, our children, each other. His money comes with strings attached, and I will not let him control you from beyond the grave. Genevieve felt a weight lift from her shoulders. You are right. Let us take what we are entitled to without conditions and go home. They settled the estate, took the smaller inheritance, and used it to establish trust funds for their children's education. Then they returned to California, to the ranch and the life they had built. As the train carried them west, Genevieve watched Boston disappear behind them and felt no regret. That life, that city, it belonged to someone else, to a girl who no longer existed. She was Grace Lawson now in truth, not just in name. She had earned that identity through hard work and love, and she wore it proudly. The children were ecstatic when they returned, throwing themselves at their parents with shouts of joy. Peter, who fancied himself quite grown up at 7, tried to maintain dignity but quickly gave in to hugging his mother. Anne and Thomas were not even pretending at restraint, clinging to Genevieve's skirts and chattering about everything that had happened while they were gone. That night, after the children were in bed, Preston and Genevieve sat on the porch watching the sunset. This had become their ritual over the years, these quiet moments together at the end of the day. "You ever regret it?" Preston asked. "Leaving Boston, giving up the wealth and status you were born into?" "Never," Genevieve said without hesitation. "That life was killing me slowly. I was dying inside, suffocating under the weight of expectations and obligations. Here I can breathe, I can be myself. I have a purpose beyond looking pretty and making advantageous social connections. I have love, real love, not the transactional relationships of Boston society. How could I ever regret that? Even with all the hard work, the difficulties, the times when we were not sure if the ranch would survive. Especially because of those things." She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "Those struggles were real, Preston, they mattered. Everything I did contributed to our survival, to building something meaningful. In Boston, nothing I did mattered. I was ornamental, decorative. Here I am essential. Do you have any idea how powerful that feeling is? I think I am starting to understand." He pulled her close. "You are essential to me, Genevieve, to our children, to this ranch, to this life we have built. I cannot imagine any of it without you." "You will never have to," she promised. As the years continued to pass, the ranch became one of the most successful in the region. Their horses were sought after throughout California and even in neighboring states. The cattle herd had grown to over 200 head, and they had added sheep, as Genevieve had suggested years earlier. They employed 6 ranch hands full-time, including Coulter and James, who had stayed with them through everything. Peter grew into a responsible young man who loved the ranch as much as Preston did. He spent every spare moment working with the horses, showing a natural talent for training and breeding. Anne was quieter but equally capable, with a gift for numbers that reminded Genevieve of herself. She kept the ranch books by the time she was 12, catching errors and suggesting improvements to their operations. Thomas was the adventurer, always exploring the hills and valleys, bringing home interesting rocks and tales of what he had seen. Genevieve watched her children grow with a mixture of pride and bittersweetness. They were becoming their own people, preparing to make their own marks on the world. But unlike her own childhood, they would do so with full support and encouragement from their parents. She and Preston had agreed early on that their children would be free to choose their own paths, whether that meant staying on the ranch or pursuing different dreams. On their 15th anniversary, Preston surprised Genevieve with a trip to San Francisco. They left the children with Martha, who had become like a grandmother to them, and spent a week in the city. San Francisco was bustling and cosmopolitan, a stark contrast to the quiet rhythms of ranch life. They stayed in a nice hotel, ate in restaurants, went to the theater. It was fun, a novelty, but Genevieve found herself missing the ranch by the 3rd day. "I have become completely provincial," she laughed as they walked along the waterfront. "A week away from home and I am ready to go back." "That is not provincial," Preston said. "That is knowing where you belong. There is a difference." On their last evening in the city, they attended the opera, something Genevieve had not done since leaving Boston. She dressed in one of her few fancy gowns, and Preston wore a suit he had bought specifically for this trip. They looked like they belonged among the well-dressed crowd filing into the opera house. But Genevieve felt out of place in a way she never did on the ranch. These people, with their affected manners and studied sophistication, reminded her too much of the life she had fled. She found herself counting the minutes until intermission when they could escape. "You are not enjoying this," Preston observed quietly during the break. "I thought I would," Genevieve admitted. I used to love the opera, but now it just feels pretentious and hollow. Is that terrible?" "Not terrible at all," Preston smiled. "You have changed, grown into someone new. It makes sense that things you used to enjoy do not appeal anymore. I prefer our evenings on the porch, watching the sunset and talking about our day." "So do I," Preston agreed. "What do you say we skip the second half and go get some good food instead?" They did exactly that, finding a small restaurant near the waterfront that served fresh crab and sourdough bread. They talked and laughed, holding hands across the table like newlyweds instead of an old married couple. And Genevieve realized that this simple pleasure of good food and good company with the man she loved, this was what happiness looked like for her now. When they returned to the ranch, the children mobbed them with hugs and questions about the city. Peter wanted to know if they had seen any ships. Anne wanted to know about the buildings and shops. Thomas just wanted his parents home. "Did you have fun?" Martha asked, smiling at the reunion. "We did," Genevieve said, "but it is good to be home." "Home is always best," Martha agreed. As Genevieve tucked Thomas into bed that night, he asked, "Mama, will you tell me the story?" She knew which story he meant. She had told it to all her children, with slight variations depending on their ages and what parts she thought they could understand. The story of how she had come to California, how she had met Preston, how they had built their life together. "Once upon a time," she began, "there was a girl who lived in a big city far away. She was very unhappy because everyone told her how to live, what to think, who to be. One day, she decided she could not live that way anymore, so she got on a train and rode it all the way west, to a place where the mountains touched the sky and the land stretched on forever." "And that is where she met Papa," Thomas interjected, even though he knew the story by heart. "That is where she met your papa," Genevieve confirmed. "And he was different from anyone she had ever known. He was kind and patient and treated her like she mattered. Together, they built a ranch and a family, and she was happier than she ever thought possible." "Because she was free," Thomas said, quoting the ending he had heard 100 times. "Because she was free," Genevieve agreed, kissing his forehead. "Free to choose her own life, free to love who she wanted, free to become whoever she was meant to be. And that freedom was the greatest gift she ever received." After Thomas fell asleep, Genevieve stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her youngest child breathe softly in the darkness. Then she went to check on Anne and Peter, finding them both also asleep, safe and secure in the home she and Preston had created. She found Preston in their bedroom, already in bed with a book. He looked up when she entered, smiling that smile that still made her heart skip after all these years. "Everyone settled?" he asked. "Everyone is settled." She changed into her nightgown and slipped into bed beside him. "I was just thinking about how different my life is from what I thought it would be. Better or worse, infinitely better." She rested her head on his shoulder. "If you had told that frightened girl stepping off the train in Yosemite that in 15 years she would have 3 children, a successful ranch, a community that felt like family, and a love that sustained her through everything, she would not have believed it was possible." "You made it possible," Preston said. "Your courage, your determination, your willingness to work hard and learn new things. I gave you an opportunity, but you are the one who made this life happen." "We made it happen," Genevieve corrected. "Together. That is what makes it so perfect. Not that everything has been easy, because it has not, but that we faced everything together as partners." Preston closed his book and pulled her closer. "I love you, Genevieve Lawson. Every day, I thank God that Grace Nelson's letters found their way to me and that you were brave enough to take her place." "I love you too," Genevieve said. "And I am grateful every day for the life you have given me, the freedom, the love, the family, all of it." They lay together in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. In the distance, a coyote howled. Closer by, one of the horses whinnied softly. These were the sounds of home now, as familiar and comforting as a lullaby. Genevieve thought back to that terrified girl on the train platform, clutching a carpetbag and a stolen identity, not knowing if she was making the biggest mistake of her life or the best decision. She wished she could go back and tell that girl that everything would be all right, better than all right, that she would find exactly what she was looking for, even though she had not known what that was at the time. But maybe that was the beauty of it. She had not known what she wanted because she had never been allowed to want anything for herself. Coming west had given her the space to discover her own desires, her own dreams. And Preston had given her the support and love to make those dreams reality. The years continued their steady march forward. Peter, at 19, took over more and more of the ranch operations, showing a natural leadership ability. Preston began to talk about semi-retirement, spending more time on the horses he loved and less on the day-to-day cattle work. Anne, at 17, surprised them all by expressing interest in going to the new women's college that had opened in Oakland. She wanted to study business and accounting, to perhaps help other women run their own enterprises. Genevieve and Preston encouraged her, proud that their daughter had such ambitious dreams. Thomas, at 15, was still finding his way. He loved the ranch but also talked about exploring the territories to the north, maybe even going to Alaska. Genevieve tried not to worry too much about his adventurous spirit, reminding herself that she had been even younger when she crossed the country alone. One evening in early summer, the whole family gathered on the expanded porch that now wrapped around the entire house. It was a tradition they had developed, these family dinners on Sunday evenings. Peter had brought a young woman he was courting, Sarah, the daughter of a neighboring rancher. Anne was home from college for the summer. Thomas was fresh from a week-long camping trip in the mountains, full of stories about what he had seen. Genevieve watched them all, her heart full. This was everything she had never known she wanted. Not the wealth of her childhood or the social status, but this. A table full of people who loved each other, who chose to be together, who supported each other's dreams. "What are you thinking about?" Preston asked quietly, noticing her expression. "Just how blessed I am," Genevieve said. "How blessed we are." Later, after everyone had left or gone to bed, she and Preston took their customary places on the porch, watching the last light fade from the sky. 22 years had passed since she first arrived in Yosemite. 22 years of hard work and harder lessons, of joy and sorrow, of building a life from nothing. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had never come here?" Genevieve asked. "If I had stayed in Boston or run somewhere else?" "I try not to think about it," Preston said. "The idea of not having you, not having our children, our life together, it is too painful." "I would have died," Genevieve said simply. "Maybe not physically, though who knows what that marriage would have done to me. But I would have died inside, piece by piece, until there was nothing left of who I really was. You saved me, Preston. This life saved me." "You saved yourself," he corrected gently. "You had the courage to step onto that train, to take a chance on an unknown future. You did the work to build a new life. I just had the incredible good fortune to be the person you chose to build it with. We saved each other then." Genevieve smiled. "You gave me freedom and I gave you a family. Fair trade, I think." "The best trade I ever made," Preston agreed. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell completely and stars began to appear. The night was clear and cool, perfect for sleeping. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new work to be done. But tonight they could simply be together in the life they had created. Genevieve thought about the girl she had been, trapped in a life not of her choosing, desperate enough to steal a dead woman's identity and flee across the country. That girl would barely recognize the woman she had become, strong, capable, confident in who she was and what she wanted. The journey from one to the other had not been easy, but it had been worth every struggle. "I made the right choice," she said softly. "Coming here, choosing this life, choosing you, it was the right choice. For both of us," Preston said, pulling her close. "For both of us." And as they sat together under the vast California sky, surrounded by the land they had tamed and the life they had built, Genevieve knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. She had found freedom, yes, but more than that, she had found home. And in the end, that was the greatest gift of all.